Before we get on with episode 78, a word from a few of our friends. Let's start off with Canterbury Park. Wednesday, August 18th. That's this coming Wednesday. Made in Minnesota night at Canterbury Park. First post, 5:10 p.m. Central Time. There are 9 thoroughbred races followed by 2 quarter horse races. 4 Minnesota bred stakes races on Wednesday night. The $100,000 Minnesota Derby. The $100,000 Minnesota Oaks. $50,000 Wally's Choice Stakes in the $50,000 Glitter Star Stakes. Don't forget the industry low 10% takeout in both the Pick 5 and the Pick 6. The 10% takeout 50-cent Pick 5 begins in race number 5, and the 10% takeout $1 Pick 6 begins in race number 4. For all that and more information, head on over to CanterburyPark.com. Wednesday is also a big day from a contest standpoint for Canterbury. Express Bet. There is a live money handicapping contest that will qualify players to the $120,000 BCBC Big Ten tournament on Thursday, September 16th. To get into the Wednesday contest, it's a $100 entry fee along with a $200 live bankroll play. The winners will receive $3,000 entries to the September 16th event, which is the largest BCBC qualifying contest of the summer and fall. Head on over to expressbet.com for details, but just to quick give you a heads up, the BCBC Big Ten tournament will award 10 BCBC seats, 2 NHC seats, and $10,000 cash minimum. All those details and more over on expressbet.com. Also, a word from our friends at Monmouth Park. With full fields and big payouts, Monmouth Park has returned as a place to profit. Monmouth's Friday Night Twilight cards are the perfect place to build that weekend bankroll. Live action from Monmouth Park starts at 5 o'clock Eastern every Friday. Weekend action at Monmouth Park begins at 12:15 Eastern every Saturday and Sunday, kicking off the 50-cent Win Early Pick 5. Start your weekend days with a bang by playing the 15% takeout Win Early Pick 5 every Saturday and Sunday. It's one of the nation's first Pick 5s every weekend. It's big fields, competitive racing, and big paydays, all at beautiful Monmouth Park Racetrack. Now, on to episode 78 of the show. What's going on? Welcome into the Matt Bernier Show, part of the In the Money Media Network. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. Today is Monday, August the 16th, 2021. This is episode 78 of the podcast. However you listen, thank you for doing so. Many ways to find the show. If you are someone who listens to the audio-only version, you've got Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, InTheMoneyPodcast.com, just to name a few. If you're someone who likes to watch along, over on YouTube, search bar, Matt Bernier Show. You'll get this episode along with the 77 prior. This week's show is going to be pretty tight. We've got Aaron Reed coming on to help us for this week's Friday feature. Saratoga's 8th race, 7 furlongs on the main track. It's going to be a starter allowance. If you want to be in Aaron's position next week, you need to leave your selection for the Friday feature beneath the video player on YouTube. If you're correct, I will contact you, and we'll set up a time to record next Monday for the show. And I forgot to mention, however you listen, please rate, review, and subscribe. It means a great deal to us. It helps us get out all sorts of different content over at In the Money Media. And as always, make sure if you're over on YouTube, that bell icon is lit up. That way you get notified anytime new content is uploaded to the In the Money Media YouTube channel. So we'll talk to Aaron Reed about the Friday feature coming up this week. My piece to start, and it's not going to be a deep dive into the graded stakes races that we saw. It's going to be more of an overriding theme. And maybe one comment on a stake outside of these. The 2 grade 1 turf races, or the grade 1s that I'll speak of anyway, the Arlington Million and the 4-Star Dave. You saw 2 totally different scenarios play out from a pace standpoint. And I will use Chad Brown as the example because Chad has done this successfully in the past. And I think we're at a I don't want to call it a crossroads, but if you have a top flight turf horse in this country and you're in a grade 1, I think you have to go to whoever the owner is and say, if you've got one that can act as a rabbit, they have to go. And if you don't have one that you own, go and either claim one or buy one privately from someone that is purely, their only job is to ensure that there's pace. Because I look at the way the 4-Star Dave played out, and whether this was the intention or not, And granted, it didn't work in this scenario, but whether it was the intention or not, both Blowout and Raging Bull are owned by Peter Brandt and trained by Chad Brown. They have contrasting running styles, and I know Raging Bull lately, anyway, this year has been a little bit closer to the pace than he has been in the past. But Blowout is a speed horse. She's going to go. And you could, in theory, have the best of both worlds. If for whatever reason the pace is very moderate, you've got a horse that can get out there and she can get brave out there if she's allowed to just walk in the front end. Or the pace is hot, someone else goes with her, as was the case here. And I say hot. It was honest. 46-3 for the half mile. And theoretically, it can help set things up for a horse like Raging Bull, who does his best from slightly off of it. It didn't work out in this instance. To me, it has more to do with Raging Bull than anything, just because I don't totally trust him. But on the flip side of things, you look at the Arlington Million, or the Mr. D, Arlington Million, and domestic spending. I think you could argue, despite the fact that he did not win, I think you could argue this may have been the best race of his career. It won't say that from a speed figure standpoint. It'll say that he regressed from that big effort in his most recent start, which would have been the Manhattan. For him to rally into not little pace, zero pace. Here are the splits for those of you that missed it. 26, 52-2, 16-3 for 3 quarters, going 10 furlongs. Now, 2 Emmys. It's a great story. Good on the connections. Hugh Robertson wins the final grade 1, theoretically, at Arlington Park. But I don't think anyone who has been handicapping for more than a minute would make a real case that 2 Emmys was the best horse in the race. The best horse in the race was domestic spending, and unfortunately for him, he just had nothing to run at. He ran each of his quarter miles faster than the prior one. Now, why is this an important piece here right now as we're talking? The idea of, from a handicapping standpoint, perhaps it's a good thing that you get there's just a complete lack of willingness to go an honest clip early on in grass racing. And this isn't just a New York thing anymore. I know New York is the one that typically kind of gets dragged just because, they're probably the most, it's most prevalent there, that there are very, very slow paces in turf routes. But it happens, clearly, it happened in Chicago. California is usually pretty good about it, but you've seen instances where everyone is just kind of grab, wait, and then try to sprint home. Well, maybe it helps from a gambling standpoint because you're now afforded the opportunity to find some of those giant prices, the horses that go to the front. Nobody goes with them because they think they're going to stop, and they don't. They just keep going. And they still have enough left in the tank, I should say, at the top of the lane to have enough of a kick that those horses trying to rally from 5 off of it or 3 off of it, they just simply can't make up that much ground. But there's also a part of me, though, that, I'm thinking big picture. I was on Spencer Lugenbuehl's podcast, the Red Board Rewind, and it bothers me when it probably shouldn't, but it bothers me that I think the only scenario in which domestic spending could legitimately have won Horse of the Year, and even if it was a long shot, but I think the only scenario in which he could have won Horse of the Year was to run the table. It was to be undefeated this year, culminating with some sort of a Breeders' Cup victory, whether it was the turf or the mile. And right or wrong, I think this race, this loss, despite the fact that he was best, in my opinion, is potentially the thing that could keep him back from that even being a possibility. So the lack of pace in these sort of races bothers me to the point that you don't necessarily get the most satisfying result unless you bet on or you're involved with the horse that upset the race. And I get it. We're talking kind of two different things, gambling versus, satisfying results. I don't know if maybe that's not the right way to put it, but I hope you guys understand what I'm trying to get at. So I'm at a point now where if I'm Chad, and I'm just using Chad as an example, and Klaravich, I'm using Klaravich as an example because they go together like peanut butter and jelly. Any race that domestic spending is in from here on, I'm finding a horse that's going to ensure that there's pace. Whether there's one in the barn that fits that bill, or you go out and claim something for 50 and you just say, look, whomever the rider is, your job is to make sure that there's pace in this race at all costs. that to me is because you're going to at that point, you can't sit there and argue that the reason we got beat, or you can't sit back on Monday looking back at the Arlington Million and say, damn it, we were the best horse, and probably by, I'm not going to say a fair margin, because I don't want to, that makes it sound like I'm not giving two Emmys and everybody involved any credit. But I mean, the best horse didn't win. And that's a little unsatisfying to me in a spot like this. And it's simply because of the dynamics of the race. And I'm not saying that Flavien Prat did anything wrong. It's just there was nothing you could do with the lack of speed in there. And I think about Europe. Europe all the time. Rabbits are used all the time from the top flight barns. And really, the O'Brien barn, they'll always use some sort of a rabbit. Think of, and not that she's technically a rabbit because she makes sense in her own right, but you think of like Summer Romance and Altica, the Godolphin horses for Charlie Appleby that have come over here. You have the best of both worlds, where if Summer Romance can get out there and get brave, she can win, but you best believe there's legitimate pace in that race for Altica to come running at. So, there's nothing wrong with that sort of thing. And some people say, oh, well, you're kind of manipulating things. Not really. There's nothing saying that you can't do that. And I would rather have that happen than see these instances where I feel like really superior talents, just simply because no one wants to go on grass. No one. I would rather see, even if you have to take it into your own hands, Frankel with Juddmonte and Sir Henry Cecil, they would have a rabbit in many of his races to ensure that there was pace. And Frankel was at least a horse that had a little bit of tactical speed. And let me look, domestic spending, it's not like he can't be a little closer, but he's probably best coming from a bit farther off than he was on Saturday. I'm at a point now where I want to see rabbit. Make sure that there's pace in the race. Because that to me is the only way that you can ensure that you're going to have the optimal chance of prevailing. Maybe you are that much better, and maybe you want to argue that if he's the bee's knees, if he's bricks and mortar 2.0, he's supposed to win. I suppose. But boy, when I see the fractions of the race, and I'm like, good God, they're walking out there, and there's nothing that anyone involved with domestic spending did wrong. But I know Chad has done this in the past. He's not afraid to put a rabbit in. I believe it was the Breeders' Cup a number of years ago where you had Shining Copper open up by 100. And I believe that was a Chad, correct me if I'm wrong, to help set up a horse like Big Blue Kitten. I don't have any issue with it. The bigger overriding question I have for all of you, the listeners and the viewers, what are your thoughts on rabbits in big races? Because to me, if I'm an owner and if I'm owning a racehorse, I probably have a fair, I can handle buying another horse. I wouldn't even think about it on dirt in route races. If I have a horse that doesn't have that early running style, this makes more sense for turf than it does dirt. But the theory still remains. Like, if I have a horse that needs some pace, why wouldn't I get a horse that I know has pace to help set up the big horse coming from off of it? Call it team tactics, call it what you will. There's nothing, it's not a forbidden thing. It's just, I want to make sure my big horse, and I go back to domestic spending because I feel like had he won this race, and if they don't run him again until the Breeders' Cup, I don't know what the plan is. I haven't read anything yet. But this could prevent him from a legitimate chance of being horse of the year if, and I recognize other chips would need to fall in certain fashions. But now I think because people still, for whatever reason, I don't want to say they look down on turf racing, but they always are like, he basically needed to be perfect, I think, to have an opportunity to be horse of the year, when in my heart, I believe he is every bit as talented, if not more so, than any other horse in training. So that's disappointing for me as a fan. Gambling, I get it. It's an opportunity perhaps to take advantage and say, look, there's no speed in here. I know I can rely on, let's think of New York, Luis Saez to go because he's an aggressive rider. He'll go. He's not afraid to. but I don't. It's not always the most satisfying result where I sit there after the race and go, yeah, you know what, best horse won. No, not always. And I think a rabbit would at least give a more honest run of the race. Put it that way. Let me know what your thoughts are beneath the video player on YouTube about rabbits in general. Also, the last piece I will bring up, and I made this comment on Spencer's podcast, and maybe it's a bit overzealous. Some people feel free to say aggressive, stupid comment, whatever. The Saratoga Special, I think you might have seen something pretty good. And I made the comparison calling without being, I don't think this is crazy, especially when you consider he's only started twice, and the horse that I've compared him to, it was in his career debut. But the performance from High Oak in the Saratoga Special, to me, was very reminiscent to that of Tiz the Law a few years ago when he broke his maiden in his career debut at Saratoga. They both earned 90 Beyers. I believe Tiz the Law earned a 90, 89, 90, somewhere thereabouts. They both sat from just off the pace. They both exploded down the lane and drew off for fun. Now, Tiz the Law was much more brilliant visually than High Oak was, but High Oak ran. And based on his pedigree, I see no reason why he's not going to stretch out in distance and run better as the distances get longer. I like that he's proven in 2 starts that he can sit comfortably. He's not some headstrong nutcase. He can relax, wait for his cue, and then go on with it. To me, at this point right now, I think you have to look at High Oak and think that, he's one of the more exciting 2-year-old prospects as far as the boys are concerned. It's probably a pretty quick turnaround for a race like the Hopeful, but I would have to think a race like the Champagne at Belmont, the 1-turn mile for a grade 1 event for 2-year-olds. I'd have to think that's next on the docket for this horse, perhaps en route to a run in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile out at Del Mar. I thought High Oak was really, really good on Saturday. Let me know what your thoughts are about that race beneath the video player on YouTube. And again, as well, your thoughts about just rabbits in general, or the thought of making sure that the big horse has an opportunity to get the job done, and we can't look at it and say he was pace compromised in a pretty dramatic fashion. Now, let's transition into some handicapping going forward. We'll talk about the Friday feature. It's the 8th at Saratoga. It is 7 furlongs on the main track, a starter allowance race, and to help us out, this week's Friday feature guest is Aaron Reed. All right, Friday feature time. Aaron Reed, a returning guest. He was the winner of, or one of the winners anyway. Again, I thought having 2 races last week, Aaron, was actually going to be beneficial. I believe you were the only one who had one of the 2 in there. So congratulations. Well done. You were a returning guest. And I had mentioned to you before we were going to start the segment that the good news is we don't need to do the full deep dive, but for those who are unfamiliar, it's been a little while anyway. Good to have you back on. And how are things?
Things are good. That might have been the only pick I got right over the weekend. It's been kind of going that way lately, but glad I was able to nail that one. We've got, it's been a busy time. Just seems to be flying by with the summer and everything. So can't believe that Saratoga Meet is actually more than halfway done, and Del Mar as well. So it's always fun watching that, but been real busy and trying to watch as much horse racing as I can. But life's been pretty full this summer, which is a good thing.
Before we get into any of the action from Saturday and certainly the Friday feature coming up, which is the 8th at Saratoga, 7/8 of a mile on the main track for starter allowance types. I remember you mentioning the first time you were on that you're involved with a few horses and you've owned a few different ones. You have anyone running right now? Anyone in training still?
No, that's been part of the frustration. We've got we've got a 2-year-old who's had what I would call just sort of baby issues. We started and stopped with him, but he's started back up again. So his name is Vortex Rising. We're hoping he's an Indiana bred that we hope to maybe hit the track here September, optimistically, here at Indiana Grand in good old Shelbyville, Indiana. And then we've got another one with Iron Horse Racing, Bohemian Boy, who debuted shortly after the show, won his debut. And then it's been kind of, nothing major, just little things here and there and so forth. But he's back, had to take some time off, but he's back starting. And we're hoping that he'll get a start in before the end of the year, but we'll see. He's shown promise, some talent. It's just a matter of getting him back on the track and going with him. So it's been a little frustrating, but that's just the way it is when you own these horses. It's a lot of patience, a lot of time and effort just to hope everything goes right and you can keep them going right.
I can only imagine too with the 2-year-old. I mean, you really never know what you've got, and I think that's got to be one of the exciting pieces. That who knows what a horse could turn into. But on the flip side, the things that you're dealing with, the little, nothing major, but just kind of growing up, the growing pains, those sort of things. I remember going many years ago. I didn't even realize it at the time, but I'll have another who went on to win the Kentucky Derby for Doug O'Neill. He had shin splints as a 2-year-old, and just like little things that, not the end of the world, but it's going to take some time for them to heal up so they can actually get back to the track. I'd imagine that has to be as frustrating as anything when those things come up.
It is, and that's kind of exactly what's happened to him, to our colt. But he's a half to a Indiana bred stakes winner that we bred. So, and he was training well. The trainers, he's with Tim Glyshaw, and Tim has, said he was coming along well. He just has, these little issues you got to deal with. And Tim's real good about not rushing horses along and pushing them along and doing what's right by the horse. So we're confident that he'll get there. It's just a matter of being patient and working through the process.
You'd mentioned this summer trying to take in as much racing as possible. The main events, I would say, over the past weekend, I'm going to still call it the Arlington Million, even though now it sounds like everything is done. The Mr. D Stakes, the 4-star Dave up at Saratoga, a race like the Beverly D out at Arlington. Any opinions on some of the results that we saw? Because really, I don't want to say it, everything was off form, but for the most part, outside of the Beverly D, we had some upsets in the 2 big grade ones. I mean, any thoughts on Domestic Spending's loss? For me, and I talked about at the top of the show, just the pace issues that are going on constantly. It's not just a New York thing anymore. It just feels like no one wants to go. And then on the flip side, you have a performance from Got Stormy that it feels like she turned the clock back and got back to one of her best. I mean, any thoughts on any of the racing from this past weekend?
Yeah, just real quick. On the Got Stormy, I can't decide whether she's back or she just loves the firm rock hard turf at Saratoga that she gets up there sometimes. So I don't know what I'll do with her going forward when you're looking at the Breeders' Cup and things, but obviously it was a brilliant performance. I mean, she put on a show again, which was really good to see. Of course, I didn't have her, and because I chased her a few times, and I'm like, is she really now a turf sprinter, or is she back to a mile? I don't know what to do with her. Kind of like Casa Creed.
Yeah.
What do you do with him? He looked like really maybe they found his niche at the sprint, and then they stretch it back out to a mile, and he ran pretty well. I mean, he hit the board. And then the Chicago racing, to me, that was an unbelievable effort to get up and almost win that race. Quite honestly, I don't think you take anything away from the brown horse there off that effort. If anything, I think it just confirms what a brilliant, talented horse it is. And if it got any pace at all in that race, it would have won. So I think going forward, it's just a matter of where they're going to go with it. Do they stretch it out for something like the Breeders' Cup Turf? Is it a miler better? Where does that horse fit going forward? But wherever it lands, that certainly is gonna be a favorite, and deservedly so going forward. I think it's the best turf horse in America right now.
I'm with you, and it's kind of unfortunate. I feel like had he won that race, and then let's say he wins a Breeders' Cup event, whether it's the turf or the mile, he at least would have had I would say he would have been a finalist for Horse of the Year. People still discount turf racing here in the States for whatever reason, to each their own. But I think the loss, despite the fact that, to your point, you could argue, given the dynamics of the race, this may have actually been his best performance. Given, and I could be wrong. I'd have to look at the sectionals. I believe every one of his quarters was faster, which is, there's something to be said about that. And he still didn't win the race. That's just an unfortunate set of circumstances. And don't take any, I'm not trying to take anything away from the winner, 2 Emmys, who just went out there and wired the field. But I can't help but think, with some sort of pace in the race, he wins. I can't help but think that to be the case. And to go back to Saratoga with the Got Stormy situation, I'm with you, because you look at her overall body of work. I got to the point last year where when they finally turned her back, I thought, okay, well, this is going to be kind of the swan song. This is going to be, she's still very competitive, but clearly she can't cut it at the top level, at the flat mile anymore. And there's nothing wrong with that. She was a 5-year-old last year. She's 6 now. And then the races that she had run this year, they weren't bad, but I clearly thought she had taken a step back. And whether it's Saratoga, because now she's 3 for 4 and 4 times in the exacta up there at Saratoga. And to your point, I remember vividly, I don't even remember what show it was, but we were doing something and there was that question. Mark Casse was very clear. We had kind of heard about it before the show started, that he's only going to run her if the turf is suitable, because she doesn't really like any cut. She likes just really, really firm going. The good news is for the connections and everybody involved, you would think Del Mar in November is going to be rock solid. And, you know, I mean, I believe she's run out there before. If I go through the PPs, no, maybe she hasn't. But I would like to think that that's going to be a surface that would be suitable for her. The question now is, do you keep her at the flat mile or do you turn her back in distance? Good problem to have, I suppose, if you're the folks involved with Got Stormy. Speaking of Saratoga, let's talk about the Friday feature. I know you've got some work things coming up. 7/8 of a mile on Saturday, race number 8, starter allowance types. Nice full field of 10 signed on in here. I think it's a really fascinating race because you've got horses who it doesn't feel like they have lived up to their potential. And on the flip side, you've got a horse, and I'm thinking of one specifically in Jake Rocks, who the last race is really fast for the level. And it's far and away the fastest he's ever run in his career. Yet he's 1 for 24 and he's settled for minor awards on 8 different occasions. Talk us through this race. Where did you start and ultimately where did you end up?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I noticed that exact. That was my notes on Jake Rock. So I started just like I do most races, just looking at the condition and trying to figure out who fits. And this is a really interesting race because it's a starter allowance condition, and it's basically a non-2 unless you won only at claiming tags and things. So you've got horses coming in from that are coming out of lower level races that are moving up. You've got horses dropping out of the grade 2. You've got mostly 3-year-old. There's only 3 older horses, I think. So that's why I picked this race, is because it's such a puzzle. You've got a million different angles coming at you. So the first thing I tried to do is figure out pace. I always try to figure out what's the race shape going to look like. And when I went through, and then try to go from there. So when I went through this, what I noticed was, for a sprint race, this is going 7 on the dirt. I mean, it's an elongated sprint, I get it, but still you'd expect there to be some speed balls in there. And I didn't really see any confirmed gotta need the lead front runner type. So, which I think really compromises some of the horses like the 1 Wicked Indeed or the 10 that look like confirmed closers to me. And so I kind of honed in on the 2 Likeable. I thought, here's one of these that showed a lot of promise as a 2-year-old. And then they've just been kind of dropping, down last time into 40 and it got gobbled up. Now what's interesting is, will this horse even run? It just ran. It'll be a 1-week turnaround. So speaking of Got Stormy, she did that at Saratoga and won two great stakes race on the turf. So clearly it can be done. I'm guessing that they claimed with maybe this in mind. And so I would expect it to run. And if it breaks and kind of can return to that more precocious form as a 2-year-old, I think it's got a shot to be on the lead. It's almost has to go, I think, from that 2 hole. So maybe that'll force it to go out. The only negative I saw there was Saez opting to ride the 4. But I think the 4 also is one he showed quite a bit of early foot. He wasn't on the lead in that last race, and it's kind of a merry-go-round race. He just chased the winner. I think it was Baby Yoda, maybe chased the winner around. But he did run a huge figure, and did that take a lot out of him, or what's the story there? It's hard to say because he is a bit of a nibbler with 8 board finishes and only 1 win in 24 tries. Repo Rocks is kind of interesting because he blew the start last time and chased Jake Rocks and the winner, but he made, I thought, a kind of a hidden middle move in that race. It wasn't a classic rush up where he rushed all the way up to the front, but he did make a long sustained move and then predictably flattened out. So I would expect him, if he breaks clean, to be right there as well. And then finally, from ones that are kind of interesting, I thought on the lead was Mr. Luigi, who's coming in from a grade 2. He was in an allowance race before that. This is the first time he's run in a class race since his maiden breaker. and this kind of a level. This is a little higher level race, but he gets Lasix back on, and good news for him is Jackie's Warrior is not in this
Yeah.
race. So even though he was, beaten 10th, I think, and was chasing way behind, I mean, this is a whole different ball game, and he should make a big improvement off the second off or third off the layoff. This one, it's got a lot of angles I like.
I think this is the kind of horse too, to that point. I think people that just look at the raw form and the running line, they're going to say, well, how could he possibly be forwardly placed? Well, when you factor in the two horses that he's running against most recently are two of the faster horses, not just in, Saratoga, in the country, as far as the sprint division is concerned, with Jackie's Warrior and even Drain the Clock. That was also over a sloppy sealed track, and he didn't have to love that. That was his first time out going over that. So to your point, pretty substantial, I would call it, class relief, despite the fact that it doesn't, 3-year-old restricted graded stake. This is a starter allowance. This is much, much softer company than he was been taking on. So I agree with you. I think he's interesting. You brought up Likeable, and he's the one. I'm almost curious your thoughts from an ownership standpoint. When you see a horse like this, because I thought his maiden score before they threw him into the Breeders' Cup last year, I thought he was really good that day. He was much more settled. He was really never asked to do much running, and he just blew the doors off a field. Granted, it was only a 5-horse field, but I kind of look at his running lines this year, and I go, well, off the layoff in the Swale, I don't really want to hold that against him too much. Again, we just talked about Drain the Clock. He was in that race. Gone for some time, comes back. They run him on the turf. I don't know if I love that. Didn't do much running. Then gone again for some substantial time. And in the big picture, yes, it was a non-winners of 2 life, but he was forwardly placed in a race that had a little bit of heat going on early, and he didn't totally pack it in. When you see a horse like this, who at least showed something as a 2-year-old, and connections like Pletcher and St. Elias and Rapoli, and they're just cutting bait, washing their hands. From you, in your position and perspective as an owner, I mean, is it a total red flag, or knowing that that's such a, let's just call it a large operation, maybe they look at it and say, we've got better prospects, we can afford to let this one go?
Yeah, I would take a flyer on it for sure. I imagine, I don't know if there was a shake for this horse or not, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if there was, because it did show talent. The fact that it does, if it came from a small, like to your point, if it came from a small operation where they don't have a whole lot of horses and they put it in, then that would be a red flag. But when groups like this do it, they want to win races at Saratoga.
Yep.
So they thought, they're going to drop it in for a 40. And B, you look at the purse structure and everything else. If it gets claimed and they win, they're going to get a decent chunk of change out of it and just move on. And obviously it has some sort of issues because it has those gaps in its running lines. But it's certainly one where if you're patient and you want to claim it, then maybe you can get it right and you can have a pretty nice starter allowance horse on your hands, or even a high level claimer going forward. I mean, that sprint, they're going to bring it back protected, bring it back in a week. As an owner, that tells me the trainer's saying, hey, this horse came back and he's just kicking the stall down.
Yeah.
He's just got lots of energy. That race didn't take anything out of him, and we want to run him back again. Now, if he scratches, then obviously that's not the case. But
you bring up an important point too, and I know PTF and I have talked about it with the happy hours, especially toward the end. And maybe it's not quite as prevalent as it used to be, because to your point, now with the purse structure, you can make these aggressive moves early on in the meet, but especially at the end, when you get into that sort of, nip and tuck, whether it's the owner's standings or the trainer's standings, look for those aggressive drops. And it's not necessarily a negative. It's just that they're trying to win the title for the Saratoga meeting, and they're willing to lose the horse if that's what it takes. And to your point, if the horse gets taken and you win the race, not ideal that you're going to lose out on a decent runner, but at the same time, you're going to make something off of it. And hopefully it ends up propelling you to the position you'd like to be in as far as the overall standings are concerned. So definitely something to keep an eye on. You brought up the pace situation. I think Likeable has to be forwardly placed. Running style wise at the 7/8 configuration, I talked about it a few weeks ago with the track profiles. I feel like that distance is not necessarily as dependent on being on the front, but I don't know that you want to come from 100 out of it. And to your point, you brought up with the lack of confirmed early gas in here, maybe some of those more fancied closers are going to be up against it a little bit from a tactical standpoint, and they're going to take some money. So in this race, knowing all the things that have been discussed, where did you ultimately land?
I ultimately landed on Mr. Luigi for all the reasons we discussed before. The one thing that I would say is kind of a stranger danger, interesting horse to me that I would definitely be using if the price is right. We don't have the morning line, or at least I didn't see one yet. I got a feeling Mr. Luigi is going to be a fairly short price. But Critical Threat is an interesting one to use because you've got Brendan Walsh trainee who won first out, and he's not a first out win trainer. I mean, he does occasionally, but not often. Now, granted, it was at 40 at Keeneland, but it was a nice 2-year-old figure that projects forward. Jonathan Kinchin talks about this all the time, about a 2-year-old figure that if you say improves 10-15%, does it fit? Yes, it does fit with this bunch. And this horse showed he could, win in first time out for a trainer, connections like that. I'm not too worried about the layoff. It's been 10 months since his last race, but he could be competitive here. The only thing I didn't like was his running style. He looked like he was kind of mid-pack in his debut and then closed well to win. Whereas I think that's going to be a tough thing here, and also going 7 furlongs is always tough to ask off a long layoff. But kind of an interesting sort of stranger danger horse there.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, kind of adding fuel to that fire. 4 next out winners from that debut score back in October. And I think more importantly for me, the figs that were earned coming out of that, the second and third place finishers, they came back and earned buyers of 65 and 75, to your point, as 2-year-olds at that point. Those races came back in November at Churchill and Del Mar, respectively. So again, I think you have to do that kind of projection, especially with a horse like this. And to your point, with Walsh not being a trainer that typically has him cranked up. And to be honest, not that this horse is necessarily going to turn into a graded stakes runner, but usually his early winners end up being pretty good horses in the big picture. It's not like they're going to be in for 20 at some point in their career. They're pretty solid. And the fact that they bring this one back here in a starter allowance position off such a lengthy layoff, I think that speaks volumes. So I agree with you from a bit of maybe a middling price, maybe even getting into that 10-to-1-ish range, high single digits. I think Critical Threat is definitely intriguing. But Aaron, your selection is going to be the 6th, Mr. Luigi, in the Friday feature, the 8th at Saratoga, 7/8 of a mile on the main track, starter allowance company. If you want to be in Aaron's position next week, you need to leave your selection beneath the video player on YouTube. From a win standpoint, Aaron, before we let you go, what would be an acceptable price for you? Like you said, we don't have morning line odds just yet. David Aragona's morning line, if folks haven't been paying attention, he's always good. But the Saratoga meeting, he has basically been spot on. You're within a half point or maybe even a point or two at worst. What would you look at this horse and say, I wouldn't play him at anything shorter than X?
3-to-1 on this one is kind of my line of demarcation there. I think if he floats up above that, I would be all over it. If it gets bet down to 2-to-1 or something like that, obviously that's a good sign. Everybody thinks he's a live runner, but I don't know that I would want. You've got too many solid horses in here that I think could pop a big one. And so I would want to get a little bit of value. I mean, 3-to-1 is not huge value, but I think that's value for this particular horse, 3-to-1 or higher.
I was going to say representative of his chances of winning. I think that's a very fair way to put it. So Mr. Luigi for Aaron Reed in the Friday feature on Friday afternoon, race number 8 at Saratoga. Aaron, thank you again for the time. Best of luck here. Best of luck with the horses that you guys have. And hopefully we chat again soon.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Matt. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thank you again to Aaron for taking some time to help us out with this week's Friday feature. Again, beneath the video player on YouTube is where you leave your selection for the 8th at Saratoga on Friday. If you want to be in Aaron's position next week, you need to be correct. I'll contact you. We'll set up a time to record and make something happen. However you listen to this thing, thank you for doing so. Again, many ways to find the show: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and themoneypodcast.com. YouTube, search bar Matt Bernier Show. You get this episode along with the 77 prior. Few notes coming up for the rest of the week. Thursday, Horse Player Happy Hour. Make sure you get involved and come join PTF and I in the afternoon. We'll be riffing about some Saratoga action and some things coming up this weekend. Speaking of this weekend, Saturday, live stream with ABR, Dan Torgman, Bram Weinstein, Ren Carruthers. We're going to be chopping up Pacific Classic. Hopefully there's another race that we'll be diving into as well. Basically all of the ABR social platforms and YouTube, you'll be able to find that. So looking forward to hopping on and chopping things up with those folks. Always a good time. And then the following week, I'll actually be up at Saratoga doing some work for ABR as well, for the Travers. So when I say for the Travers, it's actually the undercard, the Breeders' Cup winning your in races. But I'll be up there, and the Travers happens to be run that day. So, but this weekend's going to be very important, I think, in shaping what we think of perhaps the older division, at least on the West Coast. And knock on wood, it sounds like Dr. Post from the East Coast is going to be going out there as well. So, should be a fun Pacific Classic coming up this weekend, along with the other stakes races going on. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, beneath the video player on YouTube or on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. Until next Monday. Best of luck, however you play, whatever you play, and wherever you play. This has been episode 78 of the Matt Bernier Show.